Hey there, I'm Carrie Wolf Park, your parent coach. I'm a mother of 6 and I fostered 10 children. This podcast is a space for caregivers of kids with trauma to come out of isolation and get the support they deserve, moving from surviving to thriving. We will discuss how to shift your mindset, better manage trauma triggers, and other eye-opening issues. Through my work and lived experience, I know it is possible to manifest harmony amongst what seems like chaos, and I'm committed to showing you how to do the same. I look forward to connecting with you. If your child has some strange quirk or acts out in a wild tantrum for no apparent reason, you will want to settle in for this episode. Your child may be experiencing a trauma trigger, which often seems out of the blue. I'm going to share some triggers and give you ways to handle them. Last time, I defined trauma as an emotional response to a terrible incident. I made the distinction that trauma is not what happened, but rather our interpretation of what happened. The good news is that our interpretations are within our control, and we interpret everything. So I also shared the tool Be, Do, Have and how to shift your mindset. We are always choosing our way of being, but we are not typically aware that we are. For example, when you're being angry at your spouse during an argument, then the phone rings and you joyfully answer the call. You shifted away from being angry to joyful, or at least something close to pleasant. Our way of being drives our doing. Our doing is our thoughts, words, and actions. And those give us an experience, our having. If you don't like your experience, change your way of being. We applied this to how you think about your child and how you think about yourself and your own life. You'd be surprised at how many negative beliefs and untrue beliefs we hold in our thoughts. This is a way of transforming our lives, so in this case, we have more capacity to parent our kids while they're having a trauma meltdown. Of course, you can see how these tools are also helpful in all aspects of life. Oftentimes, how we address trauma triggers has to do with changing our way of being. So as you listen and apply the situations to your reality, assess when you may benefit from applying the Be, Do, Have tool and changing your way of being. Head on back to episode 2 if you want to hear how to shift your mindset in this way. Okay, first, let's get aligned on a definition of trauma trigger. I'm using a definition that says a trauma trigger is an involuntary recall to a past trauma, prompted by any number of things, such as a sound, a certain smell, a song, yelling, things like that. Triggers are as unique as people. It's impossible to know exactly what your child's triggers may be or when they'll show up. Also, don't assume that kids raised in the same household have the same triggers just because they experienced the same incidences. I have proved that wrong. Since the trauma is the interpretation, you can see how unique the triggers will be. All humans, kids included, interpret situations differently, no matter if they're siblings or not. By the way, if you know adults who have been through trauma, these triggers might sound familiar to them. This podcast is to support parents of kids with trauma, so I'm not addressing adults with trauma, but I did want to acknowledge the similarities. It's important to discern the difference between a trauma meltdown and poor behavior or acting out. It's also hard to do at times. And do know also that some triggers don't appear to be poor behavior. They might just be annoying, or they might be misinterpreted as obstinance, or just plain strange. The point being, trauma responses are all involuntary. Your child has an instinctual response. Whereas the times that she's acting out, not related to a trauma trigger, she has more control and is making choices. And she has more agency, so she can more easily learn to make different, better choices. Even though I've been at this for many years, I still miss the cues at times, and I realize after the fact that what we just had was a trauma meltdown and not acting out. We're all doing our best. Also, everything I'm talking about is applicable to parenting any child. Kids who've been through trauma tend to have more extreme responses, seemingly out of the blue, and they probably have more unusual triggers presenting as odd behavior. As I go through some triggers, I will go into details that might feel overwhelming, and really, you're learning how to go one of two ways. Use this simple framework as you listen so that you don't get overwhelmed. The first is that we want to be preemptive when possible. But we also don't want to go on a hunt for triggers. Just stay open and notice, so that when you identify a trigger, you want to find a way to avoid it. Or, if it can't be avoided, you create a strategy to manage it. The second way is when the trigger's already happened and your child is in the trauma meltdown. This is when your role is to support her through it as quickly as possible by getting yourself in a good mindset with be, do, have, so you can help her get present. That's it. So listen and apply within that framework. And remember, none of this is your child's permanent state. She can learn to overcome triggers and trauma. Always stay hopeful. Okay, let's get specific. Sensitivities. This is a good place to start. It's a big category, so think broadly as you apply this one to your child. You know, when someone experiences abuse, their senses are all engaged. So it's not unusual for a child who is abused by an alcoholic parent, for instance, to become triggered when smelling wine on a trusted adult's breath. The smell of alcohol takes the child back to those moments of trauma. Or it may also be a pleasing smell, like a perfume. If it is similar to a perfume worn by an abuser in her life, it could be a trauma trigger. See how you have to think big? It's not just a scent that has a stigma, like alcohol, but any scent could be a trigger. Maybe a trauma occurred in the woods, and pine is now a triggering scent. Keep in mind, too, that your child is almost guaranteed to not be consciously aware that she's being triggered. Don't expect her to point out the scent and ask that it be changed. That's not how this works. All of this is happening without her knowing it. Now, after some work and elevating her self-awareness, she may be able to identify some triggers. But I assume that is not the case right now if you are just learning about this yourself. Going back to the be, do, have tool, being curious is a very useful way of being with children who have been through trauma. As often as possible, staying open to something you don't know or expect will serve you and your children. You need to learn as much about them as you can in order to parent them the best you can. Depending on their age at the time of the trauma and how they interpreted it, they may not even remember the incident, let alone that they are associating it with a scent. It's so helpful to name what you observe or assert. And by assert, I mean what you think is probably true, but you're okay to be wrong. As always, you know your child best, certainly better than I do. So trust your instincts. You may sound something like, I notice you pull away from me whenever I wear this perfume. Or you seem agitated saying goodnight after I've had wine with dinner. These statements name your observation along with an assumption about your child. Leaving space with silence after making your assertion gives her the opportunity to consider how much it resonates. Having an open dialogue about the trigger is super helpful for you and your child. Be sure to validate whatever she says, even if you believe firmly it's not true. Just hear her and acknowledge that you hear her. Don't make her wrong or argue about her experience. If your child acknowledges something is a trigger, you may come up with agreements together. For instance, you might toss the perfume. Or, if it's meaningful to you, you choose to wear it when you won't be near your child. If it's alcohol on your breath, maybe you brush your teeth and turn your face away from the child while saying goodnight. Or maybe you don't even drink at all in the home with him. Alcohol is likely to be a common trigger for kids with trauma. Many adults do terrible things to children while under the influence of alcohol. So this is a big and important area to be aware of and explore more. Okay, another sensitivity is textures. This may be textures of things they touch, such as a leather sofa, or a wet, scaly raw fish. Or it could be textures of food in their mouth. By the way, knowing the why is not nearly as important as knowing what is. By this, I mean, if you notice your child won't touch things that are wet with his bare hands, it doesn't really matter why he won't or what happened to make him decide that he won't. What does really matter is noticing that it's a trigger and supporting his workaround. We have to touch a lot of wet things in life, including washing our own dishes, cleaning the counters and floors, and doing our laundry. I sure won't be doing all those chores for my kids throughout their upbringing, and I'm guessing you don't want to for yours either. It's tempting to have an attitude of, get over it, and this is where it's important you make the distinction that it is a trigger and not just something your child is being annoying about or using to get out of doing chores. The seeming extreme response is a big cue. If they tense up, if they're brought to tears or near tears, for instance, take it seriously and don't push it. You can also keep the remedy really simple. Find some plastic gloves they're willing to wear. Keep a box of disposable gloves in the house for them to use. Make sure, though, that it works for them, right? Some gloves have powder inside of them. That might be another texture that they don't want. So then you make sure that you buy the gloves without the powder. The details matter, so pay attention to them and work together with your child. Not only will you both win in the end, but collaborating sends a really strong message that you are totally on their side and you support them in life, even when you don't really understand it. Hey, I'm taking a moment here to thank you for listening to our podcast, Parenting Kids with Trauma. Be listening for actions you can take this week as a way to move your life forward. Also, I invite you to book a free consultation with me on our website, carriewolfpark.com. That's KARIWOLFFPARK.com. Please also subscribe and write a review. And we would love to hear your story. I want you to be heard. It's empowering. And we want to amplify these stories anonymously to others so more and more families know they are not alone. You can share your story on our website either by voice or text. Now let's get back to it. Okay, sounds are another huge trigger for kids with trauma. It's also another really broad category. The sound could be something obvious and specific, like a police siren, for kids who were involved in or who witnessed an accident, or for those whose parents were taken away into custody by police. A less obvious trigger could be a song that was playing at the time of the incident. It could also be yelling or a raised voice. You can see how it can be real easy to mistake a trigger for a random outburst. Lots of people raise their voices, and parents are no exception. A lot of kids with trauma are sensitive to noises in general, like being in a room with a lot of people. A great example happens in school. Imagine middle and high school classrooms. They vary by subject. I know a child who had a heck of a time in science class, even though they loved science, but it was interactive with a lot of movement and talk between kids doing labs, and there was loads of stimulation. But a class like English or history, where for the most part, all the students are sitting quietly at their own desk the entire period and no more than one person's talking at a time, those classes worked fine. So knowing the sound trigger is super helpful. If it can be avoided, avoid it. If it can't be, though, you have to manage it. You might be walking down the street to a store and an emergency vehicle passes with its siren on. As soon as you notice the siren or your child getting triggered, pay attention to him. If he lets you, wrap him in your arms and assure him he is all right. Getting him present, meaning in his body, in this moment, is key. It brings him back from his memory and those emotions from the past incident. My go-tos in moments like this are first gently putting his head on your chest and telling him to listen to your heartbeat. This helps rhythmically sync his system with yours, and it also gives his thoughts a directive so they aren't left to wander on their own back to that time of the incident. If you're unable to physically connect with your child like that because you're driving in the car or he won't let anybody touch him, tell him to do something he wouldn't normally do, like wiggle his toes. We have to think to wiggle our toes. It's not something that we do often, especially with shoes on our feet. As always, find what works for you and your child and the situation. Calmly assure him the whole while that he is safe and use words in the present tense. Going again to the be, do, have tool, you are not going to be successful in this moment if you are angry with your son or if you're freaking out because he's freaking out. Your way of being needs to be something like calm or loving or compassionate. Choose a way of being that allows you to accept your child right there in that moment, regardless of the circumstances around you. When you are grounded, you are set up to help him ground himself. Fortunately, there's a lot of understanding and conversation around sensory issues, especially for children. It's not uncommon to see kids with headphones at school, for instance. Blocking out a noisy classroom for some is the only way they can stay in the class and keep learning. One of my kids has his headphones around his neck nearly always, so his tool is accessible no matter where we are. I've named a few sensitivities which may be triggers. There are so many more, so be aware and find out what may be applicable to your child. Okay, let's talk now about boundaries and transitions. It sounds funny to put these together, but they are both ways your child might feel out of control. Boundaries, which include rules and personal preferences, prohibit someone from doing something. And transitions and changes of plans bring on the element of surprise and unknown. In both cases, the child is not in control, but she has to go along with what she's being told, but she didn't expect. All of it is about a lack of control. Kids who experience trauma were not in control during the incident, and kids in general don't have much they can control. They have to learn to work within the confines of the rules at home and school. Transitions are times when your child moves from one thing to another or one place to another. Drop off and pick up at school are big transitions. Once at school, going from the classroom to the library or assembly is a transition. Moving from listening to a book on the rug to their desks for a math lesson is a transition. For most of us, these are not a big deal, and they might even be fun. I remember loving leaving my classroom and doing something different, like an assembly in the auditorium. But for a child with trauma, this can be a frightening moment. Her body may tense, and she could become worried at what will happen once at the other place. And she has no control. She's not allowed to stay behind in the classroom. The teacher may experience her behavior as resistant or be irritated with her for not lining up nicely like her peers. This happens more than you may think. If this is your child, see if you can get information ahead of time, like a list of scheduled assemblies and the daily and weekly class schedule. You can then warn your child ahead of time what to expect. On the way to school, you go through the schedule. So when, for instance, story time's over, that will be her clue that she will have to be leaving the classroom next. And if it's still difficult, talk with the teacher about who her friends are in the class and see if a child will be her buddy to walk with her and sit with her. That will be something that she will be able to count on, like a predictable happening during this time of unknown. So she might be able to hold on to that to get through it. All of what I just suggested can even be written into an IEP or 504 plan. Those are legal documents for students who need extra support or accommodations at school due to specific medical reasons. I mentioned boundaries also as something being a trigger. Be sure your house rules and expectations are known and clear. Sometimes it's helpful to work with your child and have them write them, maybe like on a big Post-it paper or something, and hang it in the house. The fewer surprises, the better. The final trigger I'm going to mention here is trauma anniversaries. This means that around the same time of year an incident occurred, the child might act out again next year and the year after, seemingly out of the blue. For instance, if a child is taken from her house and sent to live with a foster family on October 1, next year, around October 1, the child might feel triggered. This is very common. Instinctually, the child feels what she felt at the time of the removal. Perhaps the leaves are turning colors because it's fall, or she's just getting into the groove of the new school year. Things like that end up reminding her unconsciously of that terrible thing that happened the prior year. And then she experiences the emotions from that time. Some adoptive parents, well-intentioned, celebrate what has been termed Gotcha Day, which is the day the child came to live with the adoptive parent for the first time. If the child was removed from her biological family, this could be bittersweet. It is sweet the adoptive parent celebrates the child coming into their life, but I also hold a lot of space for the child to feel some pain for having been removed in the first place, and for their trauma from whatever happened to cause the removal. I'm not saying don't celebrate, but I am saying be sensitive and aware of all sides, especially your child's interpretation. There are plenty more triggers and loads of suggestions for how to handle them. My intention in this episode was to share some and to raise a lot of awareness so you can better support your child. Also, use your resources. Ask their teachers about their behaviors throughout the day to get clues of other triggers that may not show up at home. And occupational therapists, for instance, either privately referred or those who work within the school system, can offer a lot of solutions to manage trauma triggers. As I wrap up here, I want to remind you that nothing is permanent. It is absolutely possible for your child to reframe his interpretation and become desensitized to the trauma and its associating triggers. This probably takes work with a professional like a coach or a counselor, and it's so important to stay in the space of what's possible while we deal with what is in front of us. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to connecting with you next time. If this podcast resonated with you, I invite you to share it with a friend. Please also follow our podcast and subscribe on our website, carriewolfpark.com. That's KARIWOLFFPARK.com. Also on our site, you can tell us what you got from this episode and what else you want to hear about. And we really want to hear your story. Reach out on our website and share, either in voice or text. We want you to feel heard because it's empowering. And we want to share anonymously with others what happens in other families so everyone knows that no one is alone in this. I look forward to connecting with you next time.